everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Today's the Day Changemakers Podcast. I am Jody Grinwald. This week, my incredible guest is Alfa Demmellash. Alfa is the CEO and co-founder of Rising Tide Capital and Future Tide Partners. Rising Tide Capital is a nonprofit, or as I say, for impact organization that provides underserved entrepreneurs with the resources they need to launch and grow successful businesses. Since 2005, the organization has operated the Community Business Academy. Alfa was born in Ethiopia. Upon wanting greater opportunities for her and her daughter, Alfa's mom came to the United States, worked as a waitress, went back to school for fashion design, started a side business, and then brought Alfa over to be with her. Her overall message to her daughter was that anything is possible. Alfa worked hard, graduated from Harvard, and became an entrepreneur, just like her mom. Alfa has appeared in leading media outlets including CNN, the Oprah Magazine, Essence Magazine, Bloomberg Inc. Magazine, Business Week, and Entrepreneur Magazine, just to name a few. She has been recognized by President Barack Obama, received the prestigious 25th Heinz Award, and was named a CNN hero and one of the most powerful women changing the world in Forbes. Here's the best part. She's an incredible human who truly cares about people and making a difference in this world. Truly a change maker. Listen in to hear more about Alfa's incredible journey. Please download this podcast on all streaming sites. Watch the video via the Today's the Day Changemakers YouTube channel and follow us on social media at Today is the Day Live It, LIVEIT. I hope you enjoyed listening to this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. Have a fabulous week, everyone. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Today's the Day Changemakers Podcast. Every week, I have the opportunity to interview the most amazing and incredible people who are making a difference in their corner of the world or even in a greater portion of the world. And today, I am super, super excited to introduce Alfa Demmellash. Hi, Alfa. How are you?
Thank you for having me, Jody. I am doing very well. Happy to be here with you.
I'm super happy to be here with you too. And this is a part where I do a little reading for all who are watching because Alfa's bio in resume is incredible. So I don't want to leave anything out here. And then we're going to have a fabulous conversation. But Alfa was born and raised in Ethiopia. Alfa lives now in New Jersey with her husband and two boys. She is the chief executive officer and co-founder of Rising Tide Capital, a nonprofit organization that provides underserved entrepreneurs with the resources they need to launch and grow successful businesses. The organization has operated the Community Business Academy, a 12-week course that provides intensive business management training, coupled with year-round coaching and mentorship, now serving a network of more than 3,000 entrepreneurs in New Jersey, as well as Illinois, South Carolina, North Carolina, and more coming. Alfa is also the co-founder of Future Tide Partners, which equips cross-sector leaders to shift capital, policy, and culture in a rapidly changing world of work towards an inclusive, flourishing future economy. She was named World Economic Forum Young Global Leader in 2015, has appeared in leading media outlets including CNN, the Oprah Magazine, Essence Magazine, Bloomberg Inc. Magazine, The Susie Orman Show, Business Week, Entrepreneur Magazine. She's been recognized by President Barack Obama, received the prestigious 25th Heinz Award in the technology, the economy, and employment category, and was named a CNN hero and one of the most powerful women changing the world in Forbes. She currently serves as a commissioner on the New Jersey Future of Work Task Force and as a board member of the New Jersey Pandemic Relief Fund. Wow, Alfa. It was incredible to read before I read it out loud. Now that I read it out loud, truly incredible. Kudos to you, and thank you for leading the way for so many of us.
Thank you for having me. It is you honor me by reading it out loud.
Yeah, normally I always try to summarize, right? But I think that in certain cases, it's really important to allow those kudos to come out and not to feel like it's boastful. And I think a lot of times certain women don't share all those things about themselves. When I saw that, I'm like, we have to share that. You worked hard to get there, so you deserve it.
And it takes a village, as you know. Yes, there is a lot of wonderful people who have mentored me, who've opened doors, who've asked me to join their initiatives and join their boards and contribute. And so I'm truly humbled and honored.
Well, so am I for you to be on with me today. So thank you so much. I do want to go back though, because I always find that it's so interesting where everybody starts, right? And then where they land along their journey. And so, as I mentioned, you were born in Ethiopia, and how you were there until you were how old?
until almost 13. So I came here as a 12-year-old.
Wow. And I believe it's true that your mom came ahead of you, right? To the United States, is that correct?
She came 10 years before me. Yes. There was
So
yeah.
share a little bit about that process and being a child in Ethiopia and then your mom coming here in that space of time in between. I mean, it had to be difficult not having her with you all those years.
Yes, although, I was really young when she left. I was basically almost 3 years old. And so it was, I think, a lot more difficult for her, who knew that she was leaving a 3-year-old girl in the midst of a dictatorship that had destroyed so many lives. And there was a lot of violence, and she'd lost, her siblings. And this was part of what made my grandparents actually insist that she leave the country. So she joined, lots of Ethiopians who were fleeing that dictatorship in the 80s and left through Kenya. And so within a couple of years, she had immigrated to the US. And I was, in many ways, very much like when you're that little, you have your grandmother, I had an aunt who was a fierce protector of me, and she was actually hugely instrumental in enabling my mom to have the confidence to leave, because she told her she would treat me like a purse and would not lose sight of me. And she was 16 when she made that commitment, and she truly, took me under her wings. And my mother also had the foresight to insist on things that, in hindsight, are truly extraordinary. She had learned about a little school, a little Montessori school that had opened up in the midst of the mayhem in Addis Ababa. And she insisted that they send me to this little school. And, preschool, any kind of kindergarten experiences wasn't at all, a priority. And it still is a struggle in much of the country. And so that was a huge deal for my family to organize themselves amidst all the chaos and grief, to take a little girl to a kindergarten in a Montessori school because my mother had insisted on it. So I've been, truly, I was fortunate in that my entire family kind of rallied around this little girl to make sure, that I didn't feel the absence of my mother, for sure.
That's incredible. And you know how we talk about if you take one little turn or veer one little way, your life would be totally different. So if imagine, I don't know if you've ever, I'm sure you've thought about this. Imagine if that didn't happen, right? If you didn't get to go to that school, your trajectory would be very different, I would think now, correct?
Absolutely. And I also grew up with a lot of cousins, a lot of family members, both from rural areas, small towns, places, that did not have a lot of opportunity. And they came to the city to stay with my grandparents. My grandparents were very much caretakers. They were kind of the giant oak trees in our family. And so I did have the experience of being the only little girl who would wake up in the morning and have, my clothes cleaned and, everything prepared for me so I could go attend school, while the rest of my cousins were actually working in the kitchen or supporting the family and did not have the opportunities that were afforded me. And so I feel that both privilege and responsibility in a huge way, because I witnessed it every day. And as a little kid, you do ask, you say, why is this not happening for,
Mhm.
my cousin over here when I get to go do this? And it's very difficult to explain these life circumstances. So in many ways, I'm very, very aware of it.
So how large was your class? I know you were very young, but I don't know if you even know, but how large or small was your class when you were in school?
What I do remember, and it has stayed with me, and I would say that it has probably shaped more of my life than one would imagine, but it was a fairly, it was probably 20, 25, it wasn't a huge class, but it was a small school. And I still remember as a little kid, I mean, the things you remember, but I remember the play times. We would, they would bring us into this one big room, and they would open these cupboards full of stuffed animals and toys galore. And if you're, growing up in Ethiopia, as I did, you don't have toys at home, you don't have books at home. These are not, luxuries that are afforded. And so when you see a cupboard full of toys that just tumble out, I still remember the feeling of, wow, the burst of joy from all the kids. And so, yeah, it was a really special opportunity.
And knowing that you got to go to school and see that every day, I'm sure you never had a day that you didn't want to go to school. It sounds like it was probably like a playland for you compared to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, that's incredible, and what a difference your life is now compared to where it was then. And along your journey, though, I know that you said your mom brought you here around 13 years old, right? And if I read correctly, that it said that your mom was a waitress. Is that correct? When she was.
Yes, and so she came here and she was determined. She brought a little photo of me that she carried with her everywhere, and she made a commitment that she would reunite with me. And so, as a refugee coming here, barely knowing English, she got a job as a waitress, and she realized pretty soon after that she could barely make ends meet with what she was earning, let alone saving enough and buying a ticket to bring a child here and educate me and take care of me. And so she was very, very concerned that she could be waitressing for a very long time and still not be able to see me. And so she actually was very proactive and started going to night school, and again just had enough of a wisdom for her to really ask herself what she was passionate about, what she could do. And she was very community minded and also creative, and so she started going to night school to learn how to sew and how to design clothes. And so she started a little fashion design company out of her home and would make these fantastic gowns for all these Ethiopians that she had met who were in their new country and who wanted a little bit of something from their culture, but also wanted something that was, that showcased kind of the new place that they were calling home here. And so she had started a following and would make these special occasion gowns. And she would do that on top of her waitressing job. And so she would wake up, at 4 a.m, go to work at 6 a.m, work until 2:30, come home and would make her gowns and sew really late into the night. And that continued even after we were reunited and after she was able to bring me 10 years later.
Wow, that's unbelievable and incredible. And just so entrepreneurship runs in your blood, obviously. And what about her schooling back in Ethiopia? Did she have a lot of schooling or any schooling?
She did. She had finished, high school. She was very, things got enormously disrupted when the dictatorship took hold, the Mengistu Haile Mariam regime. But before that, we were just talking about it. She's extraordinarily athletic. And so she used to actually teach tennis and teach, basketball, and would travel around Ethiopia and the country actually teaching other girls to be athletes as well. And so she was a pretty fierce lady. And even before she knew, I think, the word entrepreneurship, the idea of making your way, the idea of standing up for your values, and recognizing that you could do things that maybe you've been told you can't is, I think, something that, flowed through her blood. And I'm fortunate to be a beneficiary of that.
I think a lot of people, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but a lot of people are, with what we're all dealing with, it just seems like barrier after barrier. And you talk about, this is a woman who had a lot of barriers, but she figured it out, and some people always say, well, that person has it in them. They're special. We all have it, I believe, in us. It's uncovering it. It gets covered up with layers from other things and traumas and things that might happen in our lives, but there are ways to find it. It's in every one of us. Wouldn't you say that?
I would, and I would even add, when you think about my mom, her biggest vulnerability was leaving, this child that she brought into the world behind and being thousands of miles away from me and not having any sense of any control as to what might happen in my daily life. And so, the reality is all of us both have it in us, and we're also entirely interdependent. if it wasn't for my grandmother, if it wasn't for my aunt, if it wasn't for my family members, my cousins who showed up every day and they did all the things that I know my mom hoped for and would have done if she had been the one there. But they were doing it, and she had to have faith that, is in essence, not just her family, but the universe. And she's a person of faith, So for her, she was, really very much grounded, not only in her own ability, but in also having faith and trusting that others will step up and come along to support her. And I think that's the big piece that we're, especially as women leaders, I think we do this, pretty much inherently. I think this is something that actually women are very much oriented towards, because raising children or many of the tasks that women engage with require more than just themselves to accomplish. And I think being clear-eyed about that and honoring the collaborations and the trust that is required and the vulnerability that is required to make those relationships work is such a huge part of, the thing that I'm constantly learning and constantly sharing with others, to say, you can do it. Yes, there is, it's within you. And so is the capacity to collaborate, the capacity to trust, to have faith, and to be vulnerable, because you can't control everything, nor would you want to.
That's so true. And that vulnerability. So, it's women are typically taught that you really can't show that part of yourself as a leader, right? Because you have to come in strong, and that independence and fierceness, but you have to be careful, because you don't want to skate on. There's other things that people call women if they're too fierce. So it's finding that balance. But the real truth is being genuine, being true to who you are, and I'm all for showing that vulnerability and being honest about it, but finding ways and consistently learning. I talk about mentorship probably every single episode here, because I feel like that's that interdependence that you talk about. It takes a village to do so many things, like you said, raise children, have a career, be multi-passionate about things. You can't go all of it alone. You can't always be the marketing department, the CEO, do every aspect. You need to rely on other people.
Absolutely. And, I think, Jody, even this is something that I think we're beginning to see more and more of, which is when we're calling for women's leadership and everywhere in the world of work and government and every realm of society, when we're calling for women's leadership, we're calling for women's leadership. And so that's something that I'm also very passionate about reminding people. It's not about going and mimicking, a more masculine leadership style, because then we're not getting women's leadership. It's not that women can't bring masculine energy and can't lead in masculine ways. It's just that there is a trade-off when you're doing that you are perhaps not bringing the other energies that are actually an attribute of women's leadership that is desperately needed by every realm of our society and our civilization. And so that's the part that I am encouraged to see more of. And I think, given my background and how I was raised with such strong women in my lives, I should say, in my life. I maybe have lived multiple lives, but there is definitely the sense that I think the call to action is to say, there is something special about feminine leadership. And it has nothing to do with not being strong enough. And in fact, it's the opposite. We are extraordinarily resilient as women. We're constantly pivoting. We're constantly juggling things that would strike most other people as being seemingly difficult. I mean, you talk to any man, you ask them about their mom, you ask them about the women in their lives on a personal front, they say, we have no idea how they did it. They're extraordinary. And I think it's translating that capacity into our world of work and leadership in every part of society that is desperately needed. And I think, we have to lean into our strengths as opposed to try and hide them so we can be the tried and true, or like the thing that the type of leadership that we've perhaps seen way too much of. And I think we need to balance out.
I couldn't love that more. So thank you, Alpha, for the way you just put that, because that is so very true. We bring our own style, and there isn't one style. It's not a one size fits all. We say, one of the sayings I used to always say is, think outside of the box. Now I'm always about throw away the box. We don't need the box.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And, there is a wonderful book, actually, The Medici Effect. I don't know if you've ever come across it, but it talks about intersectional innovation. And it's that intersectionality that, we're in a moment, we're living through times where we definitely do need to throw away the box. I mean, so much is breaking open, and we have to figure out so many different unknowns that are showing up, that the strength that we do have is our capacity to show up across all the differences, across diversity, across different ways of seeing the world, to actually begin to innovate and come up with new ways of doing things. And so I agree. It's a throw away the box moment, bring in as much diversity and intersectional leadership so we can actually see the problems with fresh eyes and ask the right questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that. And that is perfectly said, because we're going to talk a lot more about the diversity piece and the social justice piece in a little bit as well. Because I think that's a conversation that we can't go away from. And it's not just a conversation. There has to be a lot more doing and not just a lot of talking. So I do want to get back to that in a moment. I just want to go back to the fact that you went to Harvard after all that whole process, and your mom, I mean, kudos. Tell the audience, please, like, your mom came here, she's a waitress. She then starts this business. She brings you over, and then you make your way to Harvard. That's just an incredible story for those individuals out there right now who are thinking, there's no way that could ever happen. My mom's is a waitress too right now. She's got a side gig going on, or side job going on, and Harvard doesn't even seem possible for me. What do you say to them, and how did you get there?
Sure. I would say, when I showed up, first of all, I didn't speak a word of English. And so I'm showing up at Logan International Airport. Mom is still in the mindset where she thinks, she's hit the button. So pause. So she's thinking I'm still 3 years old. So she's bringing the Beauty and the Beast toys, and she's trying to relive the 10 years. I'm showing up as a teen going, what is this new world? And she put me into school. She actually had put me into Catholic school, and there was no ESL, so straight in and so it's immersion. And even the principal and the teacher said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Like she hasn't even had a class in English, and she's like, "I'm sure she'll be fine." They wanted to put me back a couple of years. She said, "No. I think that would be terrible. I think she'll be okay. Let's try it." And so I'm sitting in class for 4 months, looking around, just trying to make sense of the world, right? But it's at that age, and I was fortunate that I think they talk about kind of a language acquisition age. There is a window, that 12, 13. It's like once you really hit puberty, it becomes even more difficult to acquire language. And so I kind of caught that moment. And I think the immersive experience actually helped me a great deal. And so once I went through the harrowing of the first 4 months of not knowing anything, and then it's like synapses started to fire, and I could begin to understand the language. And my mom was very upfront, and she had remarried and to a wonderful human being, my stepdad, whom I love. And both of them, they sat me down to talk to me about America, because in my dreams and what I'd seen from hearing about America, and you watch a few movies, and, you think America is like everybody's living, in a fairy tale castle, and there's, milk and honey flowing down the streets, and everybody's just eating cotton candy every day. And they kind of sat me down to say, this is the reality of what making a way, what living in this country looks like, and both the bad and the ugly, both including history, they were the first to sit me down and say, hey, when you're here, we just want to make sure you understand, because I grew up in Ethiopia, And so color, for example, and race were not things that I was conscious of. And so they're like, hey, if you get treated differently and it happens, this might be why it's happening. And you have to understand the history of it. So you're not completely blindsided and taking it personally as some kind of something that is wrong with you. And so I really appreciated that, because true enough, those experiences did come. And I could say, oh, I have a historical frame for understanding why this is happening, as opposed to doing what I would have done as a child who didn't really speak English, that there is something wrong with me. And so all that to say, I carried that fear of something being wrong with me, that I either wouldn't be able to speak the language well enough, that there were times when I would fail miserably to articulate any kind of a thought. And I went, oh my gosh, my life is over. How am I going to get into college, let alone a Harvard? Or how am I even going to fill out those college applications? But, interestingly enough, I did keep putting one foot in front of the other. Mom was very smart. The first stop we made, besides stopping by the credit union where she'd saved, for my future. And, she showed me, she actually walked me into a credit union. She's like, this is what I have saved for you. This is what I did for 10 years. And then the next stop was to the Boston Public Library. And she's like, this public library card will save your life. Here is your card. And here are all the books, and they're all free for you. It was kind of like that Beauty and the Beast moment. If we get to the cartoons, I now have little kids. But it's, so I did spend a lot of time reading, discovering the world, feeling free because of the fact that in books, you can travel anywhere. And so I felt liberated. And so that was kind of what I brought to the Harvard experience as well. I applied to probably about, if I remember, it's been too long, but like 12 schools, everything from the local community college all the way to like what would be considered kind of the middle schools to the Ivy Leagues. And since, my mother had been very clear with me, and I know exactly what her savings were, that they were not sufficient to pay what college costs, let alone today, even back then, what it costs. So I knew, I'm going to take the financial aid that would be the greatest. And I applied to all these schools, and, I lit a candle and said, well, we'll see what comes. And surprisingly, not only did the Harvard acceptance come through, but it came with the most financial aid. And so, they've gotten even more difficult to get into all these Ivy League schools, but they're also the wealthiest schools. And so I always encourage younger people who are in high school, or even their parents, not that you drive yourself crazy to try and be competitive and beat out the half the planet that is competing to get into these schools, but that if you want to give it a shot, you should. There is nothing. It's like the saying about 100% of the shots you don't take, you don't make. So if you want to give it a shot, you can. There is absolutely no reason to hold yourself back. And once you've applied, if you get accepted, these schools are the wealthiest institutions on the planet. And so they often can afford to give you more of a scholarship. And that's what happened for me. And it truly liberated me, because I walked out of Harvard after a 4-year education with so little in student loans. And I waitressed and worked my way through all of college. And so I definitely did not impose on my mom, but I also minimized any kind of loans or anything that I would need to take to cover my books and computer, et cetera. And I was even able, because I worked, I was able to take trips and go travel around the world. And, you're hanging out with other Harvard students who may come with, more resources. And so, but it also means that you can work. You can make, money, you can save money. And being out of school without huge debt around my neck meant I could sit back when I graduated and decide what I wanted to commit my life to. And in my case, as you know, I went the nonprofit route, not the route where, neither my parents expected nor most of my fellow graduates were applying to. And breaking that mold was possible because I didn't have the pressure of needing to pay back hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans.
So, just listening, the lessons here is truly determination and motivation to get to do the work and to get it done. And like you said, you saw the library as your escape route almost from the world when you needed it, but also such a learning space, right? And so when you were going after all of these different colleges, you were ahead of the game if you were doing all of that reading and preparing yourself. Some people look at the library and they're like, I have a child that does not love to read. That is just loves music, loves going in that's the direction she's going in. But that is not everybody's forte. But for those who do, and those who can use that, Harvard and all of these schools and anytime you can go to a continuing education school, no matter what level, it's a gift, because not everybody wants to go to Harvard, or can get the scholarships. But for those who can, I mean, just being able to hear your story, you've just motivated somebody. So thank you for sharing. It's incredible.
I appreciate that. And I will say one thing that always stays with me is also the guidance counselor at school. Yeah, I did not realize, and I had a friend who actually also ended up going to Harvard, who was in high school with me. And she had said, have you stopped by the guidance counselor's office and asked them for fellowships? And that was not something that my parents knew about, fellowships or internships or, and so because they were not raised here and they did not even know to tell me to go ask for these things. And so when I walked in and asked for this, there were a lot of different kinds of opportunities because schools are recruiting, others are, putting out opportunities. And that was an aha moment. And so if there is anybody who's listening, who is maybe not necessarily aware that such resources exist, but you have to be proactive about it and you have to ask and you have to say, what are, opportunities for a summer internship where I could go away and maybe have an experience where I can learn some things. And that hugely opened up my eyes. And so I would encourage definitely, there is certainly reading books is one way, but there's also a world of content and experience now that is more accessible than perhaps ever before. And so I would say definitely go ask about those opportunities. Don't be afraid to apply. Ask about scholarships and financial aid, and ask for informational interviews. Even if you're super young, I always tell anybody who's a student, I'm like, the student card is the best card. Next to the library card, the student card is the best card. You can always knock on someone's door and say, I'm a student. I would love to have an informational interview. I'm just trying to understand how the world works or how your career, how this job works. And by and large, most people do remember being a student and being young and will spend a 20-minute, 30-minute talking to you about something, and you might learn something or a door might open up that you never thought was, there to begin with.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I've been in the spot of being asked. I know you have. I've been in the spot, and it feels, you feel honored to be asked by a student to share your experience. And I think that is so important. But I just want to add to that too, Alpha, is that they won't come to you. The schools, the guidance counselors aren't coming to you. You have to do the work.
Yes. Like most things in life, you have to move towards it. It rarely comes.
Exactly. They're not calling up every student to say, hey, these are the things I have for you. I wish, but that's just not the way it works. So It is important to ask those questions. So you mentioned something at the end of what you said before, is that you went in a different direction than what your family even thought, nonprofit. And we both know, because that's my background as well. I am a multi-passionate social entrepreneur that's all about nonprofit. I think it's in my blood. I really do. But making a difference it's almost as if, when you talk to others in the nonprofit world, it's like you almost speak the same language too, because it is a very different industry. It needs to be treated like a business. And it is the only sector that's calls themselves what they're not, right? Not for profit. I'm really trying to push for impact as the industry, because that's what it is.
Absolutely.
But so you found yourself there. So give us a little bit about the road to Rising Tide. And then of course, I want you to share about Rising Tide, because I fell in love with the work that you do when I found out that you existed. And that's how we met, is when I got introduced to you. Somebody told me about your organization and I called you and you were so willing to chat. So appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the open-mindedness that came from both having not having the burden of needing to think about, a mortgage-sized student loan, and also being very much, coming of age essentially in a moment when words like social entrepreneurship and change makers, these were, whether it's, Bill Drayton and Ashoka, or learning about Grameen and Muhammad Yunus. And it was just a moment. And I remember reading a book, How to Change the World, and being fascinated because it gave like 10 examples of different kinds of social enterprises from around the world. So there is definitely, I think, I kind of started on the nonprofit or the for impact journey from a very different vantage point. And we actually, my co-founder and I, Alex Forrester, I met him, second day of school. We were best of friends all through college. And we had these conversations about what is, what does it look like for us to make an impact? What is our generation's task? And we felt very much moved by the heroes of the generation that came before us, Dr. King, and we loved, Mother Teresa, and all of these huge heroes. And that, but in the case of particularly Dr. King and the civil rights movement, it was definitely clear to us that there was the second part of the civil rights movement that focused on economics that really never really materialized. And so we have such deep, concentrated economic poverty, particularly being experienced by communities of color, adjacent to deep and profound wealth that is sometimes minutes away from one another. And these worlds existed adjacent to one another in a free country. And there seemed to be a real challenge in innovating our way out of it, or figuring out ways in which we can build better and more effective bridges that could actually dramatically change the multi-generational story for little girls and little boys who may be getting raised in a part of town where they're saying, why is this? Why am I not able to get ahead or be able to actually actualize my dreams? And so that was a real point of interest for us. And when we showed up to Jersey City, which is, right across from New York City, and, we actually had spent quite a bit of time. Initially, it's worth mentioning because I was also born and raised in Ethiopia. My thoughts were very much around international work and international development, or going back to Africa and doing this kind of work. And at the same time, we got challenged by Alex's father, who said, hey, you're asking all the right questions. And would it be possible for you guys to just start here, like start in a place like New Jersey? For example, New Jersey is one of the wealthiest economies in the world, not just in the United States, in the world. There are more huge companies, pharmaceuticals, et cetera, here. And yet you have pockets of deep entrenched economic poverty. And so he was also being challenged by this. So he asked us and said, would you be willing to engage here rather than flying off or joining some international, development organization somewhere else? And so we said, okay, well, if we're to do that, we would do it our way, which is to go and make friends and talk to a lot of people on the ground. And in Jersey City, we met a lot of really kind, smart people who are living in a part of town that was kind of watching the cranes in the sky and seeing all this development that's taking place in the downtown part of Jersey City. And in this one section and big neighborhood of Jersey City, Greenville, which is where the vast majority of communities of color live, there is a concentration of hope and vulnerability, but like no way to figure out how to connect in any meaningful way with the economic growth that another part of the city was experiencing. So we started having really profound conversations about what the root causes of this were, and how it is that we can actually create mechanisms, create a social enterprise that could help both disrupt some of the cultural barriers, but also create real meaningful economic opportunity. And for us, we were really amazed to meet so many women and men who were incredibly entrepreneurial. They were kind of like my mom, they were figuring it out. They were trying to make a way. They were asking the right questions. And we realized that we had a role to play, that we can open doors, we can use in many ways our education and the Harvard name, which would open a bunch of doors for us. And then we just made sure that we were walking with people who were entrepreneurial, who would not be able to sit in some of those rooms or have those conversations, and we would mediate those conversations. And it became a larger thing, and it became a nonprofit in 2004, and we called it Rising Tide Capital. And we started focusing on the multidimensionality of capital. That when we think about the word capital, we think about financial capital. But what we learned very early on was that money was just one critical, but one part of a problem that actually felt a lot more solvable than some of the other more entrenched challenges. And in particular, social capital. It's like where social capital is huge. Networks are important. When you think about who builds businesses, how we build businesses, it's so much about, being connected to other people who may be able to open a door, be able to be an investor, et cetera. The vast majority of businesses in the US are, coming from friends and family who are investing in these businesses. It's not, loans that are starting up businesses from banks. And so if you don't have friends and family who are, who have excess capital, excess financial capital to invest in you, where would you go? And so this is where the social capital piece became important, the knowledge capital piece around strategies, new approaches to building a business, and just even some of the, very simple, seemingly simple, but overly complicated processes and bureaucracies, helping people to navigate that. And so we were very fortunate to meet people who really encouraged us, who inspired us with their lives to create this organization. And now we work with about 1,000 entrepreneurs in 6 New Jersey cities in Spanish and in English. And we have a community business academy that is working on the knowledge capital piece and creating that social fabric, that class of entrepreneurs that know one another across class. And so it's not just about, having those who are economically under-resourced just concentrated. It's also about making sure those who have some economic resources and access to be able to sit in those spaces with our entrepreneurs and be able to have the kind of collision in a way that enables them to create a much more resilient community of inclusive entrepreneurs who are, catalyzing a thriving and sustainable future economy. That's the mission vision.
And you're growing, right? Because now, when I mentioned it, you South Carolina, North Carolina, Illinois, it sounds like you're just going to continue to blossom. Is that your vision to go nationwide?
Absolutely. What we've learned, when we were kind of putting this together, my co-founder Alex and I pulled back, and we felt like we were creating the first emergency room ever. It felt like, oh, our economy is very complex. It's like a very complex, hospital system. And I hate to use the hospital analogy because we want, a world of healing and we don't want sickness. But, you need hospitals because there is illness. But our economy is complex, and being able to find ways for people who may not have had that education. And by the way, about 50% of the entrepreneurs who come to Rising Tide have never stepped foot in any kind of a higher ed environment, right? So there is no college degrees, there's not been the opportunity, nor has it been considered affordable, nor have they had family members who've gone to college who could potentially even, play that role of opening that door. And so for us, it was very important that this be as accessible as possible for, when it comes to entrepreneurship. And this is supposed to be the country of entrepreneurship, where anybody, regardless of race, gender, etc., economics, could give it a shot, could try something, could have a dream. And so how about making that dream as accessible as possible? So that it's in a storefront, so it's on a main street, so you can walk in, so you don't need to feel like you have to be pedigreed, or you have to understand, that you are getting on an elevator and with a suit onto the 20th floor of a big corporation or a bank, or it needs to be demystified and made as accessible as possible. Because I did see, both growing up and in the 17 years that I've been working at Rising Tide, there is a huge cultural barrier for people like my mom, who would say, no, 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 no. They're business people, and then there is us, and the business people go get, MBAs, they know accounting, they're like, we don't know who they are. We sew, we cook, we make things, we, hopefully try to figure out the right price to be able to offer it to somebody who would be able to pay for it. And we delight in our creations, this is like, and so there isn't much of a space that's accessible, that's not saying, hey, you need a 90-page business plan in order for you to be able to have that experience. And basically the vast majority of not just Americans, but really across the world, have opted out to say, no, we're just going to continue creating the way we've created for thousands of years, without the 90-page business plan and without any of the things that make us feel not just uncomfortable, but really unwelcome. Because these are competencies that perhaps have not been afforded to us. And, and we don't have extra cash laying around to go hire a McKinsey or that MBA student to be a consultant and to build those kinds of infrastructure that are core, that are helpful, but that's not the priority. The priority is to make sure you're creating and generating enough income, hopefully satisfying a customer or a client, and that there is enough money left that you can feed your family, that you can maybe buy your own home, maybe you can take that occasional vacation, or maybe you can reunite with your daughter if you ended up having to leave her, as a refugee somewhere. And so that's the aspiration. And our current existing modalities for how we serve that aspiration are just, they're in dire need of innovation. They need to be more accessible. The languaging around business, the vocabulary, all of that needs to be a lot more accessible. That's what Rising Tide did. And I firmly do believe that we need this in every state, especially now in this post-pandemic world. I'm a lot more, my team and I feel a sense of urgency that the resilience, the recovery, the repair work, not just on the economics front, but on the social front, that people need to feel connected and they need to feel to be seen as contributors and to see themselves as contributors. And I know we'll get into it, but the future of work is such a huge piece of what's looming in front of us. And it's not that there is a lack of work. There is tons of work for all of us to do, but we need to be able to structure it in a way that's accessible and supports human well-being and brings all of that wisdom and reasonableness we were talking about as women leaders earlier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When we spoke, it was the height of the pandemic, and you were just graduating a large group of entrepreneurs. And I thought to myself, in the middle of a pandemic, right? That was just had to have been an incredible, when that class graduated, it had to just be even a little bit more extra special, and that's from an outsider looking in.
Yeah.
I could see it in your face too, that it was incredible.
It was the most special graduation event we've had, I think, ever in our history. You had 121 entrepreneurs from 40 cities and towns who'd shown up. And I mean, if you only knew the stories, some of the stories, my staff and I were frequently just crying as we're going through this, because there was like a 10-year-old kid who's grabbing homework for mom, who's, recovering from COVID. There were people who were taking the class in a hospital bed. I mean, like in a hospital bed. And this was the thing that happened was, COVID and Zoom and everything going digital. That was extraordinary to us because we were then seeing that entrepreneurial ambition and hope and the vulnerability. And people were doing this from the hospital bed, or they were the essential workers. They were the line cooks. They were still cooking in the restaurants, for delivery, and they had their phones and they're like trying to pay attention while they're doing this work and interacting. And it was just extraordinary for us to see the places that we were meeting our entrepreneurs in. And we felt like it was a really special community that had come together. And so the graduation was extraordinary. They felt enormously, and we felt hugely humbled and privileged to have been able to pull it off. And so it's extraordinarily special. And we're seeing this in Illinois and South Carolina, North Carolina, all of our partners, because we're doing a private label where we're taking all of our systems and then selecting social entrepreneurs and those who've been wanting to do this in their community. And then we're licensing our model and training them and supporting them. And so we have a cohort of these city leaders and these social entrepreneurs from across the country who are coming to us now. So we're building that community. And so the resilience of that and our ability to connect with each other to say, how is it working? How is it going on Zoom? How are your entrepreneurs doing? And that kind of collaboration has been extraordinary. And so we're getting the stories from all over the country with our partners who are also for impact and are doing, the good work. So it's really an incredible opportunity and moment, despite all of the grief and craziness of this pandemic. Yeah.
You mentioned before Mother Teresa and Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, and others. You're doing those types of things. I hope you feel the impact that you're having, and give yourselves the credit, because changing lives, empowering people is incredible what you've created, and your background and where you've come from, and how far you've been, and you've got so much more to give. And when I look at all your accolades, and there's so many, did you ever think that you would be a CNN hero, or that you would meet President Barack Obama and he would honor you, or be in O Magazine? I mean, these are incredible accolades from a girl who came from Ethiopia, whose mom left and became a waitress. When I say those things, because those out there who think these things sound impossible, they're more than possible if with determination. So when you were younger, did you ever think that you would have all of these things that you could put in your bio?
No, and I will also say that, I would probably imagine those heroes of ours, the Mother Teresa's and Dr. Martin Luther King would probably feel this way, which is that each one of us have our calling, and each one of us have, in many ways, whatever their essence is that we feel called to is present within us. And I certainly, one of the things that has been most validating and beautiful in my life has been, I've been focused on one block in Jersey City, especially when the CNN Heroes stuff was happening, my focus was on being as present as possible to that community that I'd committed myself to. And so whomever is walking through that front door, and it could be an entrepreneur mom coming through with her kids, and being able to be as present as possible with her and with her kids, and hospitality in one place. And I had a deep faith and belief that hopefully, if I can pour myself out in that way, even if it was one person, you get that feeling that in this interdependent and interconnected world that we live in, that whole thing about saving one life is saving the world entire. Like, if you could give your love and pour yourself out into one life, it too can literally love the world. So that was my approach, and it was the only way to do it too. I mean, I can't go buzzing around, And so, and the CNN Heroes example was one where, 5 years into the work, it was my grandmother's 5-year anniversary from her passing. And I was feeling very sad and down because I'm thinking about her life and Ethiopia, and that I hadn't made it there, that I had been kind of, really committed to the community that I'm in. And that night at like 9:30 p.m., I get a random call on my cell phone. And it was this beautiful woman, Ali Brown from CNN Heroes, saying, tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., we're coming because we've selected you as CNN Heroes. And
Gosh.
so for me, my goosebump moment
You
was,
just gave them to me.
so that has been my experience with a lot of those accolades is, when I've been as committed as possible, as being as present as possible to those in front of me. And anytime I have those kind of shadow moments of maybe I should be doing more or in these other ways, or I need to be reaching more people, the door will knock, something will happen, and in a totally different way, you can inspire people. And so, within a couple of weeks, that CNN Heroes piece was airing globally when we had been told, actually, because of Farrah Fawcett and Michael Jackson's passing within a half hour of each other, that it would not air because it would be around the clock coverage for them. And CNN decided to air that piece about Rising Tide's work around the world like a commercial during that time when their viewership was like 10 times more than. And it had this picture of my grandmother and my aunt and my mom and I as a little girl looking up. And that photo was broadcast globally, And so I looked and I said, obviously my grandma's up to some interesting things, and it was a lesson for me to say, keep doing, keep showing up in that way each moment in your life, be present, pour out where you can, and the world will take care of all that bio and other stuff that may or may not need to be in your resume, right? And
Yeah.
so don't let the resume distract you from living your true life, from living the abundance and the extraordinary gift that you have been given that only you have. There is no other Jody. And it would suck for Jody to spend all of her time thinking about how to make the resume look a certain way. And I know you haven't made it, you haven't made that trade-off. You've lived your life pursuing your multi-talents and your passions. And I think for myself, probably for you, I don't want to project, and Dr. King and Mother Teresa, if there is ever a lesson, it's live in the brightest way you can, where you are, pour out where you can, and take care of yourself. See yourself for the special whole being you are, and the rest of the world will take care of itself.
Oh my gosh, you're making me tear up over here. And listening to you about your grandmother and the beautiful sentiments you said, started the Zachdea Plutter Kids Foundation, which is a foreign impact organization in our dad's name. And people looked at us at first like, oh, like a lemonade stand, right? Because it's small and it's in somebody's name, but never the impact that it was going to have in the community, right? Mm-hmm. And like you, the signs just kept coming. Not even, it was just, you're on the path, no matter what is getting in your way, you're going to find a way around it, through it, over it, under it, whatever it takes. And I think that is something that is important to share. And it is, you get those signs from those people and those moments, whether it is a sign from another world, or it's just, you just all of a sudden somebody knocks on the door and it opens up a whole other portal for you. When you believe, and when you're not in fear, because when you're in that fear space, that's when you can become paralyzed. But when you just do it from your heart and you're genuine, the doors seem to open. Maybe not as quickly all the time as you want them to, but they do open.
Yes. And I'm so, glad to hear this story about, your dad and the foundation and the work, because at the end of the day, I do believe that there is abundance. And I think we are, as the human family, we're struggling because we feel like we either have like one shot or it needs to be a certain size in order for it to be meaningful or something. Like we're still looking over our shoulders as if these things really matter. That what really matters is that, especially given what this pandemic has taught us about the fleeting nature of who's here and who goes, and how unexpected, the life and death things that happen every day are. So I feel like the call to action for all of us is like, however small it is, if it's a seed, plant it. If it's, it's just, and know that there isn't, that you're not missing some big shot, or like that you're only going to get one chance at doing it. There are so many unexpected ways in which beauty shows up, in which generosity shows up, in which kindness shows up in your own life and in the lives of others. And you have choices that you can make. And I think so much of what I feel is so important for us to keep learning, probably we'll keep learning this throughout our lives, is to remind ourselves that it's like life is not meant to be controlled. It's not meant to be put onto a checklist and checked off. Like the most beautiful moments in your life that you might remember, on your last days on this earth may have nothing to do with the kinds of things that belong on a checklist. They may have everything to do with that special moment you shared, that story that touched you, or your story that showed up in some special way in someone else's life. And those are the kinds of meaningful things that we hang on to anyway. And so it's about kind of remembering that and keeping that awareness present in front of us, so we can keep the fears and the self-critiques aside and say, there is so much abundance and there's so much yet to be created and gifted and made beautiful. And all of us have a part to play in that, whether we're entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs, or just volunteers, or just, a dad, a mom, a brother, a sister. It's making sure that we're keeping, that abundance mindset, front and center.
You're doing so much work to uplift the community and teach the community and help them create. We're in this interesting space, and I want to bring up before we go, the social justice issue is such an important issue, and you're working in areas where there is this conversation really needs to happen. And I had somebody on the podcast not too long ago who is bringing the police force and the community together, and he's training them together through an organization. And I thought that was amazing and incredible. And you're bringing out these entrepreneurs and helping them. And you're also working with the governor's office on the future of work. And you've got all these things happening. What portion, or what are you doing around building this conversation, and just sharing with us what you're doing around building the conversation and maybe putting some things into action?
Absolutely. I think that when we do this kind of work, it always starts with us first, right? And so, for me, even though we work we work with 90% entrepreneurs of color, 70% women, we are located physically, we're building a headquarters, 311 MLK, in Jersey City, that is in the Greenville section, right on a main street. And, for even though we're in it and we have a very diverse staff, extraordinary staff, that is just, I'm pinch myself every day. And still we need to do work in continuing to examine what the influences and forces are that have shaped our perspectives about race, about what's possible, about what divides us, and why it is that that we're living in a world that certainly is perpetuating systemic racism in ways that don't serve the whole of humanity, regardless of race. And so we're kind of playing off of an old playbook when we as a species, I believe, are actually evolving. We just don't know how to evolve past it because we haven't yet fully kind of chosen to see that a new world is actually possible.
Right.
And so I think that's part of, so our work internally has been, we're part of a book club that one of our team members started and is being hosted, where we're reading Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. So we just show up every week, and any organization or group that feels called to this could do this. It's a Just Show Up book club. So there are these Just Show Up book clubs where you just show up and you listen to a reading, an audiobook, and then we talk about what comes up for us in a really respectful, trauma-informed way, so that we can continue to deepen our own capacity to engage with these subjects in a nuanced way. There is within our organization really working on our organizational culture to be one that supports whole humans, regardless of age, gender, etc., race, that can show up. And so creating an environment of hospitality in the same way that when you're preparing to host guests in your home, your organization, your places of work have to have a mindset to hospitality. It's not just a transactional space where people come and put in 8 hours and then leave, and that's that. There's a lot more going on there. And so, becoming organizations that are more fully aware and adept and competent in how to hold space for difference, and not only hold space for it in a way that is about tolerance or about, not saying the wrong thing, but really being able to create an environment and a core competency that can enable us to have the kind of dialogue that can unleash the level of creativity and innovation that comes when we're in that intersectional way, able to connect profoundly. So that's the work that we're doing as an organization, even when we are quote unquote, you could say, well, DEI, whatever that is, that's you got that in spades. And we're like, no. This is deep, profound work that we all have to do at every level. And then I think the other level of work, and you mentioned the Future of Work Commission, and that's very, very important, because when now, unlike any other time in our history, we have more data than ever. The world is data rich. You can find out how many small businesses there are, how many of them are owned by Black people, how many of them are closed, how many of them are open. You can find out all kinds of disparity information. So we're rich in information. How we synthesize it, how we make meaning of it, and to what end is a really profound and important moment. So we're still gathering the data and we're still putting out, information, and lots of think tanks are doing this, and and there's lots of great work that's happening there. There's a next level from there to make meaning of that, and make meaning of that with a lens that is holding up our values. And so for me, when I think about the future of work and the data around it, it seems like if present trends continue, if our current systems continue to build and use the data that we have in the way that they have, so systems are rules, essentially, there are a whole bunch of rules, right? If we take all that data and use the same rules for making meaning of this data, it seems like we will end up in a scenario that is really unconscionable about who's able to have a job, who's able to have a job that's meaningful, economically remunerative in ways that can enable their families to be able to, feed themselves and support themselves. So there is just huge disparity that is already in front of us, and that could risk becoming even more calcified and more unfortunate, and dispossess a lot more people of not just material things, but really their dignity. And so that piece, it's like, again, it's a choice for us to take the leap with the information and data we have to say, this won't do, because we've been here and we've done things. And part of the grappling with race and the caste systems around the world is that we had operated out of scarcity, and we had said, you know what, it's kind of better if we can grab these whole bunch of people and get them to work the fields, because we don't want to, it's too hard, or whatever it is. So we've been extractive in our history as humanity. We've taken advantage of people. We've created systems and codified them because we are oriented to think there is finite resources, and which means then scarcity to us, which means then it's competition, and which means that if you've been given a chance where you are not part of those who are being dispossessed, then you should exploit that opportunity to its maximum to protect yourself and your family for the ages. And that approach, when we're one human family living on a finite planet with tons of data and information, just doesn't do. And this is the part that excites me about women's leadership. because we just can't say, no, this won't do. Like in the same way that it's like, no, so being able to say, no, this won't do. And we have enough information. And based on that information, we think that the world that we are going to leave for our children and grandchildren is not adequate for their not only survival, but thriving. And guess what? We have all of the mental capacities, the heart and mind and consciousness. We have all of those capacities to create a different world. Mm-hmm. We made the rules. We can change the rules. That's right. Yeah. And we can, now that we have all this information about what the planet could support, how to create a good company, how to be a good human, how to create a workplace and a culture that is inclusive and regenerative and welcoming, we have all this information. It's about our habits. It's about being able to let go of our fears. It's about us being able to redefine what scarcity is about and walk into a more finite. Yes, there's finitude. You and I, we're finite. We're not going to live forever. We are here today, but could be gone tomorrow. And so an awareness and a humility around how we design for the future for our children and how we design the future of work is a responsibility that we need to take up. It's a responsibility. Redesigning systems is a responsibility. Changing our habits is a responsibility. And having leaders and others who come along to say, we can do it. The thing we can't do is give up. The thing we can't do is not take any shots at a better future. Why? Why would we do that? It's a more interesting life anyway. It's much better in every way. So that's why I'm as passionate as I am about the future of work, because it has implications for our children, for the communities I serve, for the entrepreneurs I work with, and for you and I. And it has implications for us as social entrepreneurs and leaders, for the world that we're contending for. And and there's old school competition, and it's different than contending for a different future. And that's the thing that keeps me very much awake.
I love it. And thank goodness that you are on that committee, and that you're part of this, because there's been for years and years, right, the definition of insanity, continue to do the same thing over and over again, except expect a different result. But there is no different result if we don't make the changes.
Yeah.
If they're small, we have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people decided that, well, this is the way it's been done, and we'll just continue to do it that way. But it took some major things to happen in the world to shake things up. They were already shaken up, but people were just closing their eyes. We were all closing our eyes. And so now, my goal to the podcast, and I think lots of, many people are now working on, is to make sure that this conversation never goes away. But it's not just the conversation, the action, like you're talking about.
Yes.
Because we could talk all day, but if we don't start making those incremental changes, we're going.
Yeah. And I think, there's actually a white male leader for one of the boards that I served on, who is just extraordinary. And the only thing he would do about this topic is, we're all talking about strategy, this and that. And he would just quietly say, and George Floyd. And that's all he would say. Mm. And it would reel us right back in where we could sit with that. And I thanked him for continuing to do that, because, George Floyd and his murder, and the anniversary is coming up on May 25th, right? Yeah. It did awaken something at a heart level in people to say, that's the stuff about when, if we lose one life, we've lost the world entire. If you save one life, and the thing that was so grieving about watching the, another human being who clearly chose not to take an opportunity to save one life and save the world entire. And that was the wounding, right? And so, and knowing that there's all kinds of systemic stuff that's going on, and that there are many, many knees proverbially that are, doing effectively the same thing. Yes. But you keep hoping, praying that when confronted with these opportunities to save the world entire, that we would take that, and that officer could have taken that. He could have saved the world entire. Instead, it just was like, boom. And, we're all awake saying, wait,
yeah,
he didn't do it. And there were witnesses, and we were witnesses.
Yeah.
And so, so even, that huge memory and that awakening, because when that happens, when you can have on a planetary level, that kind of an awakening, that kind of a pricking of the moral universe, it is hugely impactful because it opens up this space. And our consciousness does this thing where we sometimes want to fill it up with our activities, or we want to just shut down,
push it away.
But that opening is the space out of which we need to create our new world. And so, even though there wasn't a lot of other stuff going on, having a white male leader who would just quietly, in the midst of a very strategic conversation or all kinds of plans, dare to say, and what about George Floyd? And that was sufficient. And so I would say that there are many, many, many ways for us to encounter and engage with this very challenging and entrenched and systemic issue of global racism and racism in this country and systemic racism. And there are ways in which I think that heart space can help us get past some of the cobwebs and the confusions, and really cut to the heart of the matter, and call us to our humanity to say, let's create out of that space of that understanding. And that's really what so much of our our grapplings with history, and the reason why we go visit memorials, and the reasons why memorials even exist, is like, please remind us that we can save the world entire with the choices that we make. And please have us be part of those who would be counted for designing out of that space. Even if it's just to sit with that consciousness for a moment, that could change and impact the world. And so I just wanted to surface that, because I think sometimes we get so overwhelmed and lost in the complexity. And yet it's like, actually, and it takes a lot of courage. I mean, all these commissions and all these boards, I mean, it's like the tried and true, the best practices. What does the data say? Wait, this is too impossible. Like, we're talking, I know you and I have, the nonprofit sector or the for impact sector, right? The 10% of employment in New Jersey, small businesses, 50% of employees, 60% of employees. And it's like, oh, they're too many and too distributed, and to try to, let's just work on corporate strategy, for example.
Right.
Or larger enterprises. But it's like, no, but that's 60% of the population. And this work, they're over here. It's like, yeah, but it's so hard, but it's not efficient. It's not, and so it's like, nah, this is the moment for us to say, no. Mm-hmm. It's time to do hard things. And the way hard things get done is not one or two heroes. Hard things get done with networks of villages and villagers who come together out of a humility and out of a space of understanding, and an orientation towards a remembrance that can enable us to create the world that we really need to see emerge.
It's amazing, because I think we just came full circle with the interdependence. When we started talking, we talked about how your family had that interdependence to get you into school and to make sure you went. And here we are, we're talking about interdependence, in that it can't just be one person standing alone, screaming even at the top of their lungs. It has to be everybody hold arm in arm, saying the same thing, learning from each other, taking things to the next level, not being afraid of the unknown as we go through this tough time, and the honesty. Because I think that's the other piece about this, Alpha, is that a lot of people don't know what to say. And so but if you make a mistake, you bring that back and you learn from it, and so it is all about, I thought when you were just saying that, I'm like, it's amazing how we just came full circle on interdependence.
Yes. And interdependence, I've learned this, and I seek harmony, I seek peace building, but I've appreciated that there is so much depth in interdependence, in that it means it's in the mess, it's in the muck and the mire. It is in the, interdependence is not just us being like, oh, yay, kumbaya. It is hard work in the same way it's hard work in our families. Relationships are hard. We're many of us are conflict averse. Many of us are probably overly oriented towards shame. We don't want to make mistakes. We don't want to say the wrong thing and have someone say, wow, how could you say that? It could eviscerate, someone's entire existence just from someone saying, how could you say that? And so being able to get to a place where we can hold and regard, have a better self-regard for who we are, that we are flesh and blood, regardless of color, regardless of, the science has demonstrated. It's like, the skin color, the skin tones, it's underneath, we're like 99.9 the same.
It's the same, right?
Percent the same. So it's like, so since our brains and our behaviors and our culture, it takes time to catch up with science. But the reality is, if we can hold in our inner spirit and in our life that a conflict will happen, we will experience feelings of shame. That does not mean we are unworthy. That does not mean we are eviscerated, that we don't exist. It means none of those things.
It doesn't define us.
It doesn't define us. We can make mistakes day in and day out and wake up and say, how can I learn from this? How can I do this differently? Teach me. I want to see more. I want to be curious. There's great safety in curiosity, I think. It's just be curious. Instead of trying to hide yourself, be open, and it's much safer than what our ego would convince us, that we have to protect ourselves, and we're not as frail as we think we are.
No, we're not. We totally are not. And you have proven over and over again the importance of determination and motivation and being true to yourself and your heart and vulnerability. One of the things, and you probably hear that on every one of my podcasts here, is about vulnerability and judgment, and how we would be a lot more vulnerable and open to who we genuinely are if we weren't going to be judged. And so thank you for all you've shared on that. You've given me so much time. I feel like you and I could talk for 3-4 hours. You're incredible. But I want to ask an important question. It's my last question I ask every guest. And I hope you'll come back, Alfa, and give us an update, because I just love talking to you. You're just an incredible human. And thank you for what you bring to this world. It's awesome. You and Alex, incredible.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I would be delighted to come and keep continuing to have these conversations, because they're important.
They really, really are. But my last question is, if you knew then what you know now, what would that be?
I would say that's a really, really great question. I would say, it's, in many ways, I had made choices early on in my life that I probably, you would say it's out of naivete, or in many ways, like the things you don't know are, it's better for you. And so I would say that the fact that I had made calls to engage in leadership really early on, even to call myself a CEO at the age of 22, right? It's like, what? In retrospect, I'm grateful that I did do that, because I don't think at this point, I would say, as somebody who's been at this for a couple of decades, that I was like, oh, no, I don't, should I have done that? But you know what? I say, I'm so glad I did that. And I would encourage others to say, like, I know now how important it is, so I've been a CEO for 17 years. And I've grown and I've learned so many different things about being a CEO over those 17 years. So I started that early on, and I kept deepening my experience. And so I feel really confident about how to approach the world and how to continue to be curious and how to continue to learn. I have a lot of choices. And so that's the thing that I would impart, is that not everybody will make those kinds of choices. But if you have a choice, if you know somewhere in your gut that you want to lead, don't be afraid. Step into it, and nothing will break. You won't break. That's the thing.
Yeah, no, that's very true. You won't break. And it's resiliency, and it's mindset and resiliency for sure.
Yes.
Alfa, again, I just want to thank you for your beautiful messages and all the work that you're doing, and to be, I mean, truly a change maker, without, obviously such a change maker. So thank you so much for that. And I look forward to having you on again and hear an update of the new class that's going to be coming in, I'm sure, and hearing how many will graduate and more about the incredible work, because by the time we chat again, I'm sure you'll be in more states. It seems like you are moving quickly.
I hope so. I hope so. From your ears, from your lips to God's ears, as they say.
Oh, absolutely. I know it will happen. And thank you again for all that you do. And keep us abreast of all the upcoming things that happen so we can share them.
Will do.
And thank you again to Alfa for being an amazing guest who I could talk to for 3 hours. So thank you. And I'm going to just say what I say at the end of every podcast, which is, today is the day. You cannot go back to yesterday, and you do not yet own tomorrow. So what small steps can you take today to get you just even a little bit closer to your goal? Thank you again, Alfa. Say hi to Alex for me. And I look forward to seeing everybody next week on the podcast. Have a great week, everyone. Thank you.